Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mick Laksanakorn, Senior Software Engineer at Lyft. For several years, one of my primary responsibilities was integrating a cloud cost monitoring solution into our infrastructure. From the initial RFP through to our attribution strategy. By the end of these 30 minutes, you'll know the symptoms of when your in-house solution is no longer scaling to the needs of your organization, and leave with a template on how to select a third-party vendor. We'll start with Lyft's FinOps journey, where we started, the scale we're dealing with, and how we got to the point of choosing between continuing to build our in-house tooling and going with purchasing a third-party vendor. Then we'll look into the RFP process we ran, the framework we used, the scorecard we developed, and how we partnered internally to achieve the best results. As a bonus, we'll also include our evaluation worksheet that you can take back and use with your organization when selecting a vendor. Oh, I don't have a clicker. Thank you. Lyft's purpose is to serve and connect. We're a global mobility platform offering a mix of rideshare, taxis, private hire vehicles, executive chauffeur services, car sharing, bikes, and scooters across 6 continents and thousands of cities. This comes with a sizable infrastructure footprint underlying the product. Our infrastructure supports a team of over 3,000 strong across multiple vendors such as AWS, Databricks, and OpenAI. We run a sizable Kubernetes stack upon which we support multiple data platforms and run all of the services that make the product work. Our centralized infrastructure organization supports the entire company. It's here where our FinOps team started, where we began with a charter to manage our reserved instance inventory and to provide visibility into cloud spend. So that was around 2020. From there, we built a series of tools and services to support this. At its core, it was an ETL pipeline ingesting from the cost and usage report. We built transforms to roll up, summarize, and enrich the data. Our attribution was a mix of general rules and hard-coded mappings at the org level. We use mode for reporting and consumption. By 2022, we had begun to deepen our data enrichment to offer better chargeback of usage on our platforms, which at Lyft are what we call the shared infrastructure services that are used across the company, like Trino and Spark. We adopted a broadened charter, starting to help accounting with closing each month, and developing more sophisticated reserved instance tooling. But there was a catch. All of this tooling was built for people who understood the data model. For anything beyond the standard reports, any deeper investigation or any custom slicing, engineers needed to write ad hoc SQL. So it was geared towards domain experts and wasn't accessible to finance partners or product leadership without an engineer there to help interpret the data for them. That brings us around to 2023, when the cracks were starting to show. So what does it look like when your in-house tooling fails to scale? For Lyft, it wasn't any one catastrophic moment. Rather, it was a slow accumulation of friction that eventually became impossible to ignore for us. Let's do a quick survey of the room. Raise your hand if you know your organization also has issues with these. Who knows that their engineering teams are spending a lot of time, but just on keeping their tooling working? All right, several of you. Who doesn't know what teams their spend is coming from, or knows but not at the level of detail or granularity that you need? I heard someone say, like, that's us. And who knows that their in-house solution isn't up to feature parity with industry solutions? we were having all of those issues. Our ETL pipeline grew fragile over time as more features were added, and knowledge on how to develop on it required a deep understanding of both the pipeline and the AWS cost and usage report. Expertise was limited to the data engineers on our team. And because of this complexity and siloing, our development velocity slowed. Our attribution strategy was also failing to scale. Other than a few major platforms, a good portion of our spend was getting attributed to the infrastructure org as a general catch-all. We also had an unhealthy reliance on manual mappings. Although we had several general rules in place, exceptions abounded, and keeping these manual mappings that overrode those up to date was beginning to be a significant time burden for the team. We were also realizing feature gaps, both between the desired feature set that we knew, and also when compared to the features of third-party vendors. One such area was our investigation capabilities. While we had visualizations and charts for the most common investigation paths, we were limited there by mode's capabilities. Changing a filter would require us to rerun a query, and changing a group by often meant we had to rewrite a new query altogether. Drilling down into a specific area of spend would mean we would have to chain multiple queries together. And all of this started to impose a significant time overhead to any investigations that we were running. And lastly, there were also larger industry trends which were impacting our strategy. COVID-19 affected our resourcing and made it important for teams to have to show ROI. In support of this, the broader infrastructure organization was already moving off of in-house solutions in favor of using off-the-shelf products. Third-party vendors were also maturing, and their products were offering more featureful capabilities. So the cost to us of building our own tooling was simply starting to exceed what it would cost us to purchase a third-party vendor. So that led us to the question, was it worth all these resources, all this staffing, all this engineering hours on maintaining our internal tooling? Let's put some numbers on what this was costing us. At its peak, our FinOps team was 4 engineers, a data scientist, and a manager. But the cost of funding this goes beyond just that of compensation. When you know that the majority of your team's capacity is being spent on just working out your maintenance burden, it means that you're not working on developing new features that could allow your tooling to catch up to industry offerings. So purchasing could mean that not only do we free up engineers, we also free up those engineers to work on features instead of just keeping the lights on. Let's dig into a real-world example that we faced during this process. Your cloud cost monitoring solution probably doesn't come with attribution out of the box. It's likely something that your organization will still have to own in-house. So that's led us to the question, do we split our attention between the presentation layer, which was the big thing that a third-party vendor would provide us, the ability to have a nice-looking UI, to support performance investigations, to do reporting and anomaly detection? Do we split our resources between that and our data attribution quality? Or do we outsource the presentation problem and focus all of our engineering capacity on improving our attribution, which we would need to do anyways? In the end, the build versus buy decision was clear. We knew that we couldn't keep up with industry offerings based on our existing staffing and maintenance overhead. So the question became, how many more engineers would we need to hire just to close the gap. We built a hypothetical feature roadmap and did some back-of-the-napkin estimates. And the results were clear that we would need to hire far more engineers than what a third-party vendor would cost us. And even then, we wouldn't be able to match the capabilities of the specialized vendors already on the market. Compounded by the organization's broader push to move away from in-house tooling, and the fact that we weren't in the business of building a cloud cost monitoring solution in the first place, the decision was clear. So we discussed whether to go with a third-party solution. Now that we know where we're going there, let's talk about how we decided which third-party solution to go with, and more importantly, the framework that we used to make that decision. We'll go through the whole structure, gathering the requirements from your users, developing a scorecard to evaluate them on, narrowing down your candidate field, and also the partnerships that we developed to make it all work. Before you start to evaluate third-party vendors, you need to understand what feature sets your organization needs. We discussed the shortcomings of our existing solution, so let's distill this down to requirements. At its core, we wanted the ability to abstract away the presentation and data processing problem so we could focus our efforts on our attribution data quality. The areas that we talked about, the presentation problems, the data processing issues, these were the areas that we had the largest deficits in and the least domain expertise for solving in-house. Now, almost all of the third-party vendors on the market are able to meet this need, but it also meant for us that whichever one we went with needed to give us the little to no operational effort in maintaining them. We also knew that we couldn't support any resource-intensive Kubernetes scrapers because we knew that our clusters are simply too large for this to be a performant approach, and that maintaining the instances for these to run on could be quite expensive on their own and add to the cost of the vendor. Another core functionality we wanted was the ability to reattribute usage on our shared platforms to their end users. For example, this might mean reattributing a Trino query's cost based on the number of compute seconds that it was spent running it. This allows our platforms to effectively charge back to their users and to not become a black box of high spend. Those were the main requirements. We also had some nice-to-haves, like the ability to fairly redistribute RI and CSP discounts. By default, on AWS, these discounts are assigned in a way that are either random or not well-defined, at least to our understanding. And it meant that the discounts ended up being inconsistently or unevenly distributed between services. We wanted a fair cost metric, which would distribute these evenly. At the time we were looking, no single vendor on the market had all of the features that we wanted. And this is where co-development with your vendor comes into play. By doing so, you're able to support your existing workflows going into it while still having all the benefits of having a third-party vendor. Your vendor also benefits from this. It's unlikely that your needs are necessarily unique to your organization, and when designed carefully, they're able to offer these capabilities to all of their users instead of just you. You can take a look at shared cost reallocation or fair share costs for examples of features that Lyft and our vendor co-developed. Let's take a moment to dive into our attribution story. Like I mentioned, you're still probably on the hook for your attribution data quality. And not only that, your third-party vendors' capabilities are only as good as your attribution. We talked about our existing problems, such as our over-reliance on manual mappings. We also had the additional complexity of trying to map teams to finance cost centers, which at Lyft didn't neatly reflect the official organization chart. We knew that this was our opportunity to revamp the entire approach entirely. We decided that for Lyft, attribution had to be simple. We would support the organization chart because it was the source of truth and it was programmatically accessible for us. But it would stop there. We wouldn't support any subteams that didn't appear officially, we wouldn't support any parallel hierarchies, and we wouldn't support the finance cost centers. We also moved to automatically tagging our resources with their ownership information in alignment with industry standards. So that's the question of how to map the organization chart. So that leaves the question of how do we determine what team a service belongs to? Unfortunately for us at Lyft, we didn't have an existing field that already did this mapping for us. Instead, what we had were team emails or Slack channels or other such fields that could be used to infer the ownership of the service. We went with PagerDuty escalation policy, which describes what the on-calls for that service are. We knew that using this would give us the most up-to-date information on team ownership because on-call rotations are updated as a matter of normal engineering practice and not as a separate FinOps task. We would look at the engineers on the escalation policy and see which team was most represented amongst them and assign that team as the owner of the service. Now let's go into our vendor selection process. We'll go through at the high level and then dive down into details. Your first step before you even start any of this is to know what feature set you want to support. We talked about our technical requirements earlier, but now we can go into capturing your stakeholders' needs. We'll go into a bit more detail about this later. Then you could start your preliminary scan of the market. We started with a list of around 6 vendors, and we conducted meetings with each to see their demos of their products and to ask questions about their feature sets. This is also your opportunity to make sure that they don't just support your features that you need, but also that the product prioritizes the areas you value. Based on this, we were able to eliminate several vendors which we felt weren't a good fit for our use case. From there, we developed a scorecard to evaluate our vendors on and used it to narrow down our candidate field to 2 finalists. With those finalists, we ran live proof of concepts on our production infrastructure using our real data. Vendor demos can give you a starting point for evaluating vendors, but being able to work with them in real life lets you see how well they scale to the size of your infrastructure, exposes bugs, and lets you do real-world feature testing. Based on this, we were able to decide on our final vendor, Finout. One of the most useful things that we did in this process was to gather user stories from all of our stakeholders, whether they be finance partners, or platform owners, or product leadership. Let's walk through 4 user stories that were particularly influential in shaping our requirements. The first comes from an infrastructure engineer. That's me. I want the ability to charge back our tenant services on our compute platform based on their usage. And that's just table stakes. Without this, infrastructure teams are left holding a large bill that should rightfully belong to their tenants, and services aren't incentivized to take ownership of their spend. We also wanted the ability to fairly redistribute RI and CSP discounts, as we mentioned, because without this, when costs increase, teams don't necessarily know whether this is due to a change in the behavior of their service or whether it's just due to some random discount assignment behavior. Similarly, we also spoke to our platform owners. They want the ability to also distribute usage on their platform, but using custom metrics. This means that they're able to charge back their costs to their users, avoiding becoming just a giant cost center for the company. And also, it lets them incentivize their high-volume users to decrease their usage, because those users will now be able to see these costs directly in their team's bill. Our third user story comes from a finance partner. They want the ability to close the books each month without having to rely on an engineer to interpret the data for them. Having to do so is a tax on both teams, and you just have to wait around for a while so that all your schedules line up. So it's really not ideal. Being able to eliminate this tax means that finance is able to self-serve, and engineering doesn't have to put aside the time from their engineering tasks to do so. The last comes from a director who owns multiple teams. They want to know when a team or a service is causing their costs to increase without having to assign an engineer to investigate. This means that they're able to proactively take ownership of their costs at their director level. When a cost increases, they know who to talk to investigate, and they're also able to get ahead of any cost increases before they pile up and get incurred on their organization. This is more than just an opportunity to survey your users. It's also your chance to codify processes, to decide which workflows to carry forward and which to drop. You might find during this process that you discover workflows are poorly defined, poorly documented, or perhaps just redundant. For Lyft, it was a chance to simplify, to prune unneeded workflows, and to decide what we wanted our FinOps story to look like. Talking to stakeholders can give you more than just engineers who will give you a feature checklist. Stakeholders will tell you whether those features actually support the workflows that they find important. So I spoke about an evaluation worksheet. A simplified version is shown on this slide, but we'll provide a QR code at the end of the presentation that you can use to access the full document. Based on our user stories and our technical requirements, we distilled a set of criteria to evaluate our vendors on. You don't need to split hairs on grading at this point. Exceeds expectations or needs improvement or meets expectations is more than enough to get a general idea of which vendors best support your use case. Obviously, the criteria should be adapted to your business needs. What's a must-have for Lyft might just be a nice-to-have for you, or it might not be relevant to you at all. Ideally, several vendors will stand out here, but even if they don't, I encourage you to try to prune down your candidate field to 2 or 3 options, because the next step that we're going to do is to perform a proof of concept with these vendors. And while it can be tempting to do a POC with all of your options, each one is a significant investment of engineering resources, and trying to do too many can really bog down your RFP. Now, as an engineer, I'm unfamiliar with software procurement or writing contracts, but your organization likely already has roles specialized in facilitating these. Our global supply management team was a key partner from day one. Your organization might have a slightly different name for them, but their roles are likely similar. They helped structure the RFP, helped lead negotiations, and lent their expertise to really smooth along the process. Plus, they know all of the levers that you can use in contract negotiation, whether it be terms or pricing or brand usage agreements. This frees you as an engineer to work on the technical aspects, or whatever aspect you're most specialized in. In the same vein, make sure you bring in legal or project management or leadership in early along in the process. But choosing your vendor is only the start. To get the most out of it, you need to make sure that your organization is actually using them. Because we were able to co-develop our must-have features with Finout, we were able to entirely replace some of our workflows. Because of that, our FinOps roles were early adopters, rather than being stuck using two tools partially. This then had a trickle-down effect. As our FinOps roles introduced other engineers to the tool, they would turn to it organically when they had cost questions. Migrating our dashboards onto Finout let finance partners self-serve, so we no longer had to dedicate a domain expert to helping them close. And all of this meant that we could deprecate our in-house solution quickly, rather than having to pay parallel costs. One of the biggest wins from this has been our anomaly detection program. Using Finout, we're able to detect when costs increase at the team, the service, or the platform level, and contact the correct owner to investigate. This means that we're able to catch overspend early, before these become a huge problem and all the costs pile up. And this is only possible when you have strong attribution, the ability for your engineers to self-serve their investigations, and strong anomaly detection features. This brings us to the present day. Over a year into our partnership with Finout, we've been able to attribute over 96% of our spend by cost. This means that almost every resource has an owner, and when the cost of those resources increase, we know who to turn to investigate. We no longer need to dedicate an engineering team to maintaining our FinOps tooling, which is a win for Lyft. We've been able to fold out their charter to several other teams. For example, our reserved instance and compute savings plan management now has been folded into the compute team's charter. Our anomaly detection program is run as a cross-functional virtual team, and finance is now able to self-serve with no domain expert needed. We're not done with our FinOps journey. Today, we're able to answer how much a service is costing us in terms of AWS resources. We're working on integrating our usage metrics into our cost data. So tomorrow, we can answer how much this service costed us per ride that it served. This allows us to align our cost with our business outcomes, and building then this business context into our anomaly detection will just help us take it a step further. Your costs may increase, but it's very different when they're scaling with your business metrics, rather than when they're just caused by a mistake. So let me close with the things that I wish we knew going into this process. First, watch the signals early. Your growing maintenance burden or your inability to fulfill stakeholder asks. These can be signs that your solution is no longer scaling to the needs of your business. Also, keep an eye on industry trends. Vendors may have improved the capabilities of their offerings to parity or beyond with your own tooling. Make sure you quantify and then make informed decisions. Keep an eye on what your resourcing is costing you, but also on your development velocity, whether your engineering capacity is going towards building features or whether they're just keeping the lights on. Reach out to vendors to get quotes before assuming what they'll cost you. Third, gather real user stories. Some of the most important requirements that you'll come across could come from outside of the engineering organization, and I think this is especially true for FinOps. Also, don't become overly attached to your existing workflows. There's a good chance that you'll be able to adapt these to industry standard features or be able to work with your vendor to co-develop support for them. Make sure you run the RFP without stalling. Try to get to the point of running a proof of concept early, as this will be the most informative part of your process. Spending a few months with a POC can offer you more details than a much longer time spent evaluating distantly or from just vendor demos. And lastly, make sure you partner, both internally and externally. Seek out the roles in your organization that are specialized in solving each of the problems, like global supply management and project management, and make sure you rope them in early. Similarly, make sure you work with your vendor to support the feature sets that you need and co-develop with the ones that aren't currently on the market yet. You can find the evaluation worksheet at this QR code.
Please give it up for Mick.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Yeah. I'll start with you.
Hi, this was very insightful, thank you. My question is, I know you mentioned getting the user stories from a lot of stakeholders, and that makes perfect sense. I'm curious to know, when that happened, did you have like a very long list? And then if you had to cut down, how did you prioritize the user stories so that you can map it, to the next level, to the vendor provider, the functions they provided?
Yeah, I think we got a variety of responses from different roles. I think especially one thing that stood out to me was across directors. Some directors had a very long list of the features they wanted to support, and some of them were just like, no, this is good. In terms of deciding which ones to prioritize, I think look across the overall big picture of the user stories, see which trends appear more often, and prioritize those. And sometimes you just need to use your judgment on deciding oh, this is a one-off case. It doesn't affect the broader usage of the product.
Oh, yeah.
All right, thank you. Sorry, my voice is a little bad, so I apologize ahead of time.
All good.
I can't help but notice from a timeline perspective that when you guys started seeing the issues that you were having to make you go down the decision of doing a vendor-led solution was back in 2023. So I think between now and then, obviously a lot's changed in terms of AI, and it's come a long way in terms of what developers are able to do. So I think the question I have for you is, if you were to run into that situation 3 years later, would you look at it as a tokenomics decision where you'd look to invest more in your existing in-house solution, or would you be looking at it as a, hey, let's bring in an external vendor to solve this problem? Would it change the way you're thinking about the problem?
Yeah, I think, yes, AI would have improved our ability to more quickly develop the UI and the data processing problem. But I think in general, the philosophy was just that we aren't in the space of trying to build a cloud cost monitoring solution, and our requirements weren't necessarily so complex that a vendor wouldn't work for us. So it simply just made sense to go with a vendor because it wasn't a priority for us to really be in this business.
Makes sense, thank you. Can I toss it? All right, yeah, this is great.
I've been wanting to toss one of those boxes all day.
I'll toss it to you right now. I have so many questions, but I guess the first one is you did your analysis and you ended up deciding to buy. What is there something that maybe put it over the edge? Is there somewhere where you were more on the fence?
Yeah, I think one thing that we were on the fence on was our ability to reattribute usage on our platforms. That was a pretty important one for us, and it was one where we didn't see any of the vendors on the market have support for something like this.
That's been also my experience with some demos I've gotten, that I would say 50+% of our spend would be a black box because of platforms.
Yeah. So we worked with Finout. We wrote up a spec on what the feature set we wanted was for this feature, and we've been able to support it with their product. So shout out to them for working with us on this.
Okay. And last, so where you had some engineers working in FinOps, and that's probably constituted the FinOps practice. What does your FinOps practice look like now? Is it just go look at the tool, or?
Yeah, so currently we don't have a dedicated FinOps team. And historically, I don't know if this is different for a lot of other companies, but we ran our FinOps from the engineering part of the company rather than being part of the finance side.
Same.
So currently it's sort of a cross-functional sort of team. We have a PM who is dedicated, not dedicated, but who spends a lot of time looking at our anomaly detection and making sure that those are followed up on. And we have several engineers in other teams specializing in different areas. Like, for example, I specialize a lot in compute savings plan and our RI management strategy. Our storage team has a similar thing with their storage reservations. And so even though we don't have a centralized dedicated FinOps team, we've spread that concern across several teams and roles.
Anyone else? Want to throw it?
I have no hand-eye coordination.
My question is, in terms of your live data and the POC part of your segment, like, did you give access to the entire live data? Was there any delay in getting access, and were there like formatting issues where they needed it in a certain format, and how did you get over that?
Yeah, so we gave we just ran the products in our production environment, so they had live access to all of our data. Largely, we are an AWS house, so we gave them access to the cost and usage report, and that's a fairly standard format, so they're able to work with that out of the box.
Hey everyone, producer Andrew here. Thanks for watching. Check out the rest of our channel for more FinOps content. Like, subscribe, and leave questions and comments for our speakers. We appreciate your support.